What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to this episode of Split Screen D&D, the place where we're attacking all things Dungeons & Dragons from both sides of the screen. My name's Tom Quinn, resident Dungeon Master here at Modern Myth.
And I'm Josh Winans, resident player character here at Modern Myth.
And no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Chicken butts, maybe.
And no, none of those. No buts.
Do chickens have butts?
Yeah, well, yeah, of course. They have to have butts.
No, I don't think they do.
Death!
Wow, transition.
the hard transition. No, it's really, I think, in the world of Dungeons and Dragons, should be an inevitability. At some point, as a character, you should be experiencing it. As a DM, you should be running for it. I think it's an inevitability. If it's not an inevitability, and I'm not saying for every character, you're definitely going to die.
Yeah.
But I think that over your career in Dungeons and Dragons, at some point, it's very likely it's going to happen. And
I can't wait to talk about this because I have a feeling that me and you might verbally spar, which you
we might
usually
disagree.
win these,
We might disagree
just a
on
little
this,
bit. But before we start hitting each other with words, hey, internet, man, it's I keep every time we shoot one of these things, I just am completely like re-amazed by how amazing the community that we're building, and it's so awesome to read you guys' comments. But have you liked yet? Have you subscribed? Have you hit the bell? For these are things that matter, evidently, to the almighty YouTube algorithm, and we must appease our masters. So if you could do that, that'd be awesome. And yeah, seriously, the comments are amazing. Yes. And hey, if you also want to donate to our wonderful beer fund, our alcohol fund, we have a Patreon at patreon.com/modmyth. Did I get it?
You nailed it twice now. You've got it down.
I'm not going to let it. I'm going to mess it up next time.
Spokesperson.
I know, right? It's going to mess it up.
I think we should dive right in, and I kind of want to throw it over your way because ultimately, I think, I actually think it's a topic. Player death is a topic that really is perched. It has one leg on both sides of the screen. I really don't think if a DM is just washing their hands and going like, well, it's the player's death, so, well, I got nothing to do with it, then I don't think that's a good place. And obviously, if it's your character and they are dying, or I should say they have died, that's pertinent to you. So
just a little bit.
If it works for you, I was going to kind of pitch it straight over into the character space, the player space. Talk with me. What's on your mind with regard to your character or one of your party members meeting the ultimate end? Let's talk about that.
So yeah, I do see the importance of understanding mortality. That if you don't have that part of the game, then you're robbing yourself of a lot of tension, a lot of unique moments in the game, a lot of immersion. A lot of these wonderful things that I think only death can bring to you, but it's also it depends what kind of game you're playing, as always. But if you want us to role play, if you want us to get into character, and you want us to become attached to these characters, and they're just dying a lot, I'm not going to go through the emotional pain of losing a character over and over again, especially if it's a unheroic death, like falling in a trap. So it's, for me, a player character death, while I do understand where you're coming from, you're asking us to accept that something we love is going to die. And while that can bring around a lot of amazing things, we're playing this game for fun, to a lot of us, to escape some of these horrible, like life is a hard thing. And we play this wonderful game to sometimes kind of escape that. And when you bring that just in, it could hurt a player's enjoyment of the game immensely. To almost, if it's taken to extremes, they're not going to play it anymore.
Yeah,
that's extreme.
I could definitely see that. I think my lead in saying, it really, I think, should be an inevitability over your career. That's not necessarily every campaign your character's dead or every character you make ends up dead.
And I understand that.
But I think if there isn't the real deal there to remind you,
Right.
we're all just pretending that it might happen.
Yes. So you need and I understand that.
And I would also say that I think to some extent your framing, I don't know if this was intentional or not, I'm not. I'll be interested to hear what your thoughts were.
Uh-huh.
I don't think it's ever the dungeon master's job to bring a death into the game. I mean, a death should absolutely hinge upon the decisions made by the characters. Now, how much you're holding their feet to the fire is a massive topic of discussion, and
Yes.
Many of our old school subscribers are like, hold them to the fucking fire, like,
Yeah.
and again, I think for that style of game, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that I completely hear what you're saying, and I think that there's a couple different takes with regard to death. When you're talking about what I think has become kind of the quintessential new school table space, which is effectively a cooperative storytelling environment.
Yep.
Kind of 5th edition has basically handed you something that allows you to endear yourself to a character with very little concern of death. And that is, to me, that is kind of the initial switch, is how much is very little. Obviously it's less than in virtually any other iteration prior to.
Yeah.
And like I said, I'm not saying that that's the wrong way. I mean, I've said plenty about the lethality of 5th edition. But I think that I got the sense from your initial thoughts that to some extent, and I think if I could be so bold, I'd love to hear in the comments people's thoughts. I actually think there is something about the 5th edition ethos that places a certain amount of responsibility onto the dungeon master should a player death occur, as though they didn't do their job in keeping you alive. And this, I think, that's a very damaging a thing.
Yeah.
I think and again, there's so many different relationships with regard to DMs running their tables, players playing their characters. But I think if a DM is showing up to the table in good faith and a player is showing up in good faith, should a player death occur, everyone should be able to look at it and go, these were the decisions that were made that led to this, and in an objective manner.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to get your thoughts on that. Because
Yeah. So, yes, I hear what you're saying, and that and I like how you phrased it. If we're both coming to the table in good faith, that we have this the foundation of trust and respect, that we're coming here to we have a similar mindset, then it should be where I don't feel like you're trying to win, that you're not trying to kill me. So I totally agree with that. But you are, the DM is in control of the situations. So if you're like, unless they pickpocket the 3rd elf from the back, they're all going to die.
Well, I would say that's not me being there in good faith. If I've created a scenario that is
but some people can justify some
malicious,
crazy things.
Well, I definitely get that. I actually think this portion of the conversation that we're having right now does in fact transcend, because I think coming to the table in good faith means very different things at a 5th edition table than it does at a 3.5 table than it does. And why I say that this is kind of, I think, grown up around the 5th edition ethos is because I think if your home base is in the old school, that I think this conversation is a much more expedient one in the old school space, because a player sitting down in that space understands that is a very likely possibility. And I think that they haven't placed any responsibility on the dungeon master. The dungeon master holds no responsibility over the well-being of your characters. I mean, it's understood that you could walk into a room that is a no-win scenario, or I should say a no-win combat scenario. And I think that I think to some extent, and this is partially baked into the system with regard to talk about balancing encounters and things like that. There's an expectation in 5th edition that I'm not going to put something in front of you that is unwinnable.
Yeah. Well, and it's, I will say there have been times when we've been playing where it has felt like, holy cow, holding our feet to the fire, mostly through the draining of resources. Like we've had a long time between rests. It's like, you just threw gosh, the Hydra, and then all of a sudden we get ambushed by Githyanki.
Now,
I mean,
to that point exactly, that ambush can only have occurred if Aster used her ability.
right.
So there's a perfect example of that. I mean, yes, I've established the rules kind of behind the screen of if she uses this ability, then there is a certain chance that they show up.
Right.
And so, but I mean, absolutely. Like I said, and I will say, like I said, I think a lot of what we're doing at our table is not, straightforward. I'm trying to, generally speaking, strike some amount of balance. I think still definitely leaning towards the heroic, epic, long form story that 5th edition is designed to do. But I think things get a little too waltzy without occasionally bringing that in. Now, I think we're wading into the weeds of conversations about difficulty in general.
Yes.
And so I'm going to try to just steer us back a little bit in the direction of death specifically.
Okay.
And so just working off of kind of what you had said about, let's say, character continuity and player investment and these things. And I think those are very real question marks. I mean, if it was a 99% chance that every session your character was going to die,
or even like every 3 levels, like there's a very high chance that you're not going to make it to the 3 levels. Like, and if you're talking about a long 1 through 20 campaign,
right?
Why would that's going to be a very big hampering thing for me,
right? And I think to some extent, I think the death of a player, the weight that imposes, and I'd be really curious to hear from those who call old school home base, because it's something I've been giving a lot of thought to with regard to this conversation is, and actually in the kind of OSR style sci-fi campaign that I'm running, when they TPK'd, I said to myself, well, they can roll up new characters, but whether you're invincible or can instantly just respawn as a new character, is death still being the elephant in the room that it should be? I mean, it's what, like, if you have an unlimited number of rerolls of characters, and your character is dying, every few sessions, I mean, you've got infinite lives or one invulnerable life. I mean, take your pick. So I'd be kind of curious to hear people's thoughts in that space. I think that's why I think striking some balance. I mean, players need time to become invested in their characters, and they need the ability to have that continuity to remain invested and to remain immersed in those characters. But I think no weight can really exist if they know that regardless of what they do in the world, next session they're sitting down as they're the character that they love and keep right on rocking. I think so. It's a tightrope, and every table I think has to walk that a little differently.
I totally agree. So in that regard, what is a good way to handle? I mean, obviously every table is different. How is a good way to handle death? Let's say, okay, there's hey, we could use. Well, actually, no, we resolved it, and I just barbecued more friendly forces. But there was a time there when TPK was actually quite on the table. All right, so let's say Ariel's character would have died. Okay, how in that moment by an ambush, by that wasn't a great big battle. It was just kind of a thing. How should a death be handled in that situation?
Well, I think my position, and I would say I would be encouraging both DMs and players to think of player death. I completely agree with you that especially in this new school long form storytelling space that kind of has defined a lot of 5th edition games. I, as a DM, I don't want the story for a character to end with, you tripped over a root and fell headfirst into a pit trap and you got skewered and that's it for you. I mean, I would much prefer, like you said, a heroic, fantastic ending where when they think back to that end,
Yeah.
they're going, man, like that was a meaningful way to go.
So death needs to be meaningful. But in that case, in this instance, it was a small ambush. It wasn't the land wasn't on this battle.
Yeah.
What would how could you make that death meaningful?
I'll say, I mean, that can be a very serious challenge.
Mm-hmm.
So the big thing I would encourage for both DMs is that there is an opportunity in a player death, both
Mm-hmm.
an opportunity to find. I mean, one, I would say if a player death is looking likely, I think that, I mean, that's your opportunity to start getting your ducks in a row for, like, whatever the circumstances is. I mean, you've got to work with what you've got. That's just, and unfortunately, there may be times where, I mean, someone just the luck of the dice means that someone goes down and don't get back up. I think you just, what I would say in terms of making things meaningful is, one, work with what you've got. Don't just go, well, this isn't very meaningful, so I'm not going to give it any of its due. Work with what you've got. I think handing that back to the player is not a terrible idea. I mean, in that player's final moments, sure, maybe there's chaos erupting around them, and that's my job to inform, to paint that picture. But that's a very internalized personal experience for that character.
Right.
I think being able to hand it back to them and allow them their final piece. I mean,
Final words.
Because again, I think the onus being on the DM to make that meaningful solely.
How can you? Because you don't know what the players see as meaningful. It's like you can try your best and what you feel they would, but it's really up to the player to provide that.
Right, and I think being able to hand it back to them, and however you set it up. I mean, kind of in the same way you might set up the death of a villain that they've been they've been chasing down. You don't just want to go, all right, you did 12 points of damage, he falls over, he's dead. Yeah. I mean, does that villain have any final words? Does he leave them?
Oh, you gotta have the villainous
the classic villainous monologue.
Yeah, the middle finger to the party as he sinks beneath the lava or something like that.
Yeah. And I think to some extent that's an example of where it truly is entirely in your wheelhouse. But being able to hand that back and kind of say, what is this experience for you? It's also, I think it's a very sobering hand back because they know at that point you're handing it to them and you're saying, hey, this is it. Like, and I mean, again, especially in this space that is like role play centric, long form. Cool. Yeah. Maybe they just got wiped and they should be unconscious and they're, in terms of
rule of cool, man.
Well, yeah, I'd grant them all sorts of leniency if they're glancing around the battlefield, feeling the last ounces of themselves drain out onto the floor. Kind of, what they might be thinking as they look to their right, their friend who's been there since session one, to the left at a newly made friend, or maybe even someone that has been kind of adversarial, or whatever. But what is the experience of understanding that this is it, and I don't think a DM is near as well poised to speak to that. I think they can set up all the trappings for that. But I'll be the first to admit there are moments in which you just don't have the tools to work with that, and I think in terms of lethality, that's something I certainly think about. If you guys are in a big boss battle, I'll go, no one is going to die here feeling as though they are,
Right.
and just by nature of the structuring of, say, boss battles, I think there's kind of an innate understanding of like, this is going to be the real deal here.
Yeah.
And so that, to me, that's kind of the general, my general immediate thoughts on it.
And bouncing off of that, it's also the other players at the table can make it a very meaningful
100%.
depth. So yeah, if you're finding yourself, and it's hard, and I can speak because I just barbecued like all those friendly forces, and I in real life got super pissed. Like I was mad.
You were a little put out.
I don't want to watch that episode.
You were straight humperdink.
I was like, well, I tried so hard to like think of a way out of it, and then I was like, oh, okay, I can roll with this, and then it like something happened where it's like I couldn't do it anymore. It's like, well, frick this, I'm done. But anyway, so I can understand when you're faced with this moment where you're like, it's a no-win scenario, and your emotions is, F this, I'm done. Why do I play this game? That I can see that as being a very natural reaction. But I think tempering that with I think you bring up like, hey, death is around the corner. You live the adventure life. This is something you should be prepared for. Almost on the session, kind of like my character
again, depending on your table,
Yeah.
But absolutely, I would say.
That's true.
Even
Maybe
if
not
that
so.
hasn't been heavily reinforced, just purely from a role playing standpoint, you lead a terrible life by all accounts.
Yeah, unless
you
when you're rolling in the cash, you're still facing dragons. I mean, most
Right.
people are just like cooking cow or something. So I mean, yeah. So being prepared for it can be hugely helpful. And as the other characters at the table too, you might get like, you serious? You're gonna die because of a python bit you and the poison succumb, and that's how you're gonna die?
I don't think pythons are generally venomous, but
Adders?
I'm with you. Yeah,
adders are,
pit viper.
okay.
Yeah.
But that being allowed to, like other players, the other players at the character, English motherfucker, do I speak it? The other players at the table can really help make that a meaningful experience, and I think that's something we should be very mindful of.
100%. Something we talked about when we were talking about what makes a great DM, what makes a great player. We talked about that kind of support player, and what an opportunity for a third party
Yeah.
to the death. I mean, if the DM's kind of adjudicating it and the player's experiencing
Right.
it, for another player to be able to inject something into that scenario that helps clarify the meaning of the event,
Yeah.
in some cases. And so, and I think you nailed exactly what I feel the opportunity is on the player side.
Yeah.
That it really is an opportunity. I mean, depending on how you feel about it, and I know when the sci-fi campaign TPK'd,
Yes.
Amanda was pissed. Like
Yes.
I could tell she was pissed. And I was talking with her that night, and I just said, like, like now that we've this has come to a close, we're going to roll up new characters. But I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah.
And she didn't have many good things to say.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're emotional. It's your first yeah.
But what I can say is, and again, granted, this was a campaign playing out in a space where it was understood that this was a very real
right.
possibility pretty much at any time. I mean,
Yeah.
it was definitely kind of a horror vibe, and but the next day I could see that she had found the opportunity in it. Like she originally was ruminating on like maybe it's going to be difficult for her to find investment in this next character, knowing how things went.
Yeah.
And I'll say that none of those concerns came to fruition. If anything, they're like this next go through, I can see how much more investment there is there. I'm not going to venture a guess as to why,
Yeah.
but it was a very different experience. I would say it was a very 5th edition response to what doesn't happen all that often in
Right.
5th edition. And, but I think that's something to consider is it's narratively, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for so much to happen narratively.
Yes. I mean,
Role play, it's an opportunity, but pragmatically speaking, outside of the game speaking, maybe this is a character you've been wearing for years.
yeah, I had that thought too.
And that is not to diminish. You might,
No, I'm sick of my character, man. I want to kill him.
well, that it's, I mean, I think that there are
There are times when
players, I mean, I think there are many characters who have met an end by asking to be written out of a story or asking to be killed.
Yes.
And you don't really have to ask; just do things to get yourself
Yeah,
killed.
but it'd be good if hey DM, I want to do this so you can start to lay the work to make this a meaningful
well,
thing.
if you're trying to make it a narratively significant exit to the story, and like I said, there's no reason they have to die to do that. But I do think that there's absolutely opportunity in player death for players to kind of allow that initial hit to wash off them, and then go. No doubt, I've had thoughts about other cool characters, other cool concepts, other cool, and now is your opportunity to bring one of those to life. And you may come to find that you can't believe how much you enjoy this new character.
Right.
You also may every session mourn your original character.
Well, yeah, and I think that's healthy. But
It's probably a little column A, a little column B. But I would absolutely say if you're every time you're sitting at the table, you're being cognizant of the fact that death should be a possibility, and that there's an opportunity in it from both sides of the screen. There's opportunity there to not let that go to waste. That's not something, especially in 5th edition, that happens often.
Yeah.
So allow that to be the significant moment that it is. And again, in the actual literal breakdown, that can be easier said than done, depending on how that's occurring. But if you're being cognizant of it, I think it's something you can prepare yourself for.
Absolutely. And I was just thinking when you're talking, it's like, well, character death might not be death. It might be like, hey, my character has reached their goals. They've done what they've set out to do, and they're hanging up their adventuring hat, which is almost like a death. Like
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's it doesn't have to be death. And also, when the character dies, it's not like, oh, that's it. Bye character. You're never going to be mentioned again. Like, continue to reference that character. That other players at the table should be like, I don't know if we should have this new adventurer. They're no X. They can't replace our old party member who was such a value. And then continually bringing that up. I mean, that reinforces how important that character was.
Well, I think especially in a space where, as you're progressing, you're reaching, ungodly superhero levels of power. You legitimately should be. The passing of one of these types of heroes, they likely shaped lore.
Right. There might be towns mourning.
Yeah, in the world, and I think that's something to not in the DM sphere of opportunity. There's plenty of opportunity to narratively remind the party of the value that character brought to the broader story, whether it was for a few levels or a few years, however that plays out. Something I'm curious about is, and I don't want to pivot here prematurely, but
it is Tuesday.
TPKs. I think TPK is actually a fair bit more difficult to handle, only in the sense that there really is a sense of the hitting the back cover in the book.
Yeah,
closing.
that's kind of the end of that story.
Yeah,
I mean,
and obviously the events of the world that are more or less agnostic to the existence of those specific characters can keep going on. But something I will say is the double-edged sword of the immense amount of work that goes into on the world building side, if you're is kind of tempered by kind of exactly what I was talking about. Is if it's a TPK and I go like, all right, guys, well, we'll pick it up next week. Just roll up your new characters. We'll see you guys then. There is that does not, I think, achieve precisely what I was talking about allowing that.
There's no weight there.
Right. And again, I would be hesitant to go so far as to say that for me, I certainly, my mind goes to, this might be just the place where we go, this book is closed and we look at something entirely different.
Yeah.
Like I said, that has to be tempered by the practical aspect of there's a tremendous amount still of lore and all of this still out there that could have absolutely, I mean, you could tell 5 different stories simultaneously and none of them step on each other's toes.
Right.
So you'd be throwing out a whole lot of kind of world building legwork. But I'm not a huge fan of the party being rolled back up as though it's an extra life. Now,
Yes.
obviously new characters and but to just go, well, you guys overheard basically everything that's been going on, and
Right.
and obviously you make that as interesting a reintroduction into the
Right.
world as you want. But I've got very mixed feelings about
Yeah.
what the right way to handle that is. And again, I actually think that that's a very 5th edition Tether. When you're very, very used to TPKing your party, and then
Yeah.
I don't think every time you TPK your party, it's great advice in every system that you throw everything out and start everything from
goodness,
scratch.
no. Well, but you don't have to go. There's a video game called The Sword of Ditto. It's a roguelike where you try to. It's like a Legend of Zelda type game. But if you succeed, then the world gets better. But if you fail, the world gets worse. And kind of just have that system, like, oh, you all TPK'd. The world is suddenly just a little bit worse. You
Right.
know? That kind
I
of thing.
certainly think that allowing, especially if you're picking your next iteration up with some time span having traversed in between, there's a cool opportunity to be able to present a world that has been missing this level of heroics for some time.
Yep.
And the task may now be more difficult for their evil has progressed
Yes.
in that space. So absolutely.
But I don't know. I'm curious how you think about this. So if a TPK happens, I almost want. And this might be horrible. I might be a horrible person for saying this. I almost want the DM to be like, "Oh man," I want the DM to share in this experience of mourn and loss with the party. I have all these grand ideas of what I want my character to be. You have all these grand ideas of what you want this world to be. And in this moment, that's all for naught.
Well, certainly if it's all getting thrown out, and I would say even if there's 0 implications on the world, like it's literally we're going to roll up new characters and just get right back to it. I 100%. I mean, I think if you are a DM at your table, I can't speak for every game and every type of game that's playing out there. I mean, if any of the characters at the table died, I know I would feel something about that.
Yeah,
I mean, it would not be just, oh, so and so died, and
Right.
that's the way it happens. That's the part of this game.
Yeah.
I mean, I think all of these characters, just to a greater or lesser extent, I have been kind of present for their birthing as they were conceptualized, and we ran through your backstories, and we, and so I think part of my job is to temper the fact that I love these characters.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm getting at is so we're going through a loss, and if all of a sudden the DM's like, all right guys, roll up new characters, see you next week,
Oh yeah.
that will create a divide instantly. Because now, it now feels like it's DM versus PC, which is definitely not the attitude you want to ever have in the game.
Right. And I think again, if with any amount of tact in that space, I think I think there's a very good chance that event draws the session to a close. And
Oh yeah,
and there's
then you have pour your beverages for each other, get a little if you're over 21, have a good all night. But
I think again, that is a very modern sentiment because
yeah,
the alternative is you've got other characters already
I
rolled
guess
up.
That's true.
And it's a very different take. I don't think one's right or one's wrong, but I do think if you're playing the type of game that we're running at our 5e tables,
Right.
then yeah, I mean that's part of kind of the social contract we've all signed up for is
Right.
like these characters are are meaningful protagonists in the story, and you know, it to this is probably a bit of an extreme push, but you know, there's a certain tone and tenor that you keep when you're at a funeral that you know,
Right.
and I think to some extent, narratively speaking, you
Right.
know, the party, or at least specifically that player, is in mourning, and you don't go like, you know, lighten up, buddy. You just roll some dice. You know, we're
Right,
like,
yeah.
we'll get you back on
Yeah,
track.
exactly.
You know, I mean, and again, I think that just doesn't fly in the context
No,
of.
that's just being a dick. Like,
Well, like I said, I think there are absolute tables where that's the expectation.
well, but you're right. You're right. But in the 5e, the more narrative where you get really attached to these characters, and I make it gross. I'm sure in OSR there are people who are very attached to the characters.
Oh, no doubt.
And would
No
definitely mourn their. Well, no, man, if things survive more than like 3 sessions, they're probably like, I'm gonna marry this character. But like it, yeah. I don't. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't want to be like, hey, you're a horrible human being if people like that play that. I definitely want to get that across. But yeah, it's I don't know, social skills 101, man. Like, be
Well,
empathetic.
yeah, I think reading the table is,
Yeah.
and I mean, I wouldn't need to read the table. I would know for our table if there was a player death.
Right.
It's the part of what I was talking about making it meaningful is not simply moving on to the next encounter.
Right.
You know, I mean,
And it depends on like other different people. How I handle death is going to be different than Amanda. I think we're very polars.
Oh,
opposites in
absolutely.
this.
I think you're far more prepared for that
And
possibility.
then again, it's not that I'm not attached to my character. It's more I'm just like, one, I always have a cool character in my background that I'm always excited about. But two, I put myself in situations where I probably will die because I'm the tank. That's my job. I'm the
Right.
first. As far as I'm concerned, I'm the first one who falls. So for me, it's like, yeah, that's what I should do. Then I won't speak for Amanda, but yeah, I think a character death for her would be a much, because she also does have a lot of resolution with her character. That could be very hard.
Absolutely. Yeah. Especially as long as we've been running this campaign.
Yeah,
and,
poor Amanda.
and she has by and large not been able to address a bunch of elements of her character. Obviously, she's moved tremendously through her character's progression and her character's arc, just not in the ways that she anticipated starting out. I mean, she knew from square one she wanted to get back to save her brother.
Right.
And I certainly think a character who is kind of like you said, mostly fulfilled, or maybe even entirely fulfilled what they set out to do, whether it be a retirement of that character or a death of that character has imparted meaning into the world. It would be harder to feel that way if you felt like you had never gotten to pursue the things that were important to you as a character. So, no, I think there's I think the give me your player side summary, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree that it's kind of like you don't understand how good food tastes until you've been hungry for a long time. That if you are never faced with mortality, if you're never faced with hunger, then you won't know how sweet life can taste. And I think that's a very important thing especially in the world of D&D where you're constantly faced with life-shattering things. So I agree with that completely, and it allows for such creative space. But it's something to be handled extremely carefully with, and to understand that for DMs that when not you kill our characters, but when the world decides our characters should end, if that terminology makes you feel better, that's hard. That is really hard on us. And I'm not saying it's not hard on you too, but these are our characters that we've really invested in. So I love that how you've said like, okay, let's make sure that we make it. It's one thing if something was sacrificed and nothing happened. That's hollow. But if something is sacrificed and beautiful things arise from it, then all of a sudden, okay, death is something I can accept, and death as I can see it for the positive that it can be.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say as a player's side.
Yeah.
Is that kind of idea.
I'm gonna just point one more thing out. Specifically your vocabulary
I'm trying not to.
only because I really and I really think that this is symptomatic of whatever that ethos is. If I were saying the same phrase, I
Mhm.
think it would be if I made decisions that ultimately led to my death.
Okay.
But
I see what you're saying.
I don't think you're alone. In fact, I think as 5th edition goes, you are in the vast majority.
Mhm.
But I think it is something anyone who's out there listening to this, watching this, and thinking about player death, think how you would frame that experience.
That's
Because I think in many cases there's a sense of washing your hands of the responsibility for that
That's
character.
a very good point, and that's something I probably need to address within myself. That was how I phrase it, and that's kind of how I feel most of the time. But you're absolutely right.
I've seen it a bunch. I've talked with people in the comments.
Yeah.
I think it's a derivative of the near immortality that kind of arises in 5th edition,
Mhm.
that like a DM really does have to try. But that does not mean that they are trying to win against you.
Mhm.
But like you said, we're really having to try just to provide you a sense that maybe you're not immortal.
Right.
And that's sometimes I can see how that can feel like, man, I know how hard he had to try for me to die back there.
Mhm.
And that can feel a whole lot like they were trying to kill you. And I think more appropriately, they were trying to remind you that you're mortal.
Mhm.
And that can be a very fine line, especially when combats begin to get the swingy nature that they get in different places. But I thought that was interesting because it was one of the big things that I've been thinking about
Yeah.
in terms of the way characters and DMs think about death in the 5th edition space, and how that kind of contrasts with any variety of other spaces. We talked about 10 Candles before.
Yeah.
Literally, that game ends with you all dying. I mean,
Yeah.
you start the game knowing that this is a story about your final moments. It's not there's no heroics. There's no, I
Right.
mean, maybe there will be some heroics before you die,
But you're gonna die.
you're gonna die.
Right.
And that's obviously, you could never build that same ethos around a game like that, where the players are kind of going, it's maybe not as DM centric, I guess you'd say, but where the game would come to an end and they go like, man, I can't believe I died. It's like you die every time you play
Yeah.
this game. Like, what do you know?
Why are you surprised by this?
Yeah.
It's
So
like playing Demon Souls and expecting not to die.
hey man, you got every now and then you got one of those maniacs who does like a no damage speed run.
Oh yeah, that's the first time they ever picked up the game. Yeah, right.
Yep.
No.
Some of them.
Nope. Nope.
I think to summarize the DM side, and I think I'm actually really glad that ended up being the pivot, because I think one of the big takeaways, especially in the 5th edition space, and like I said, on the DM side, I really do need to temper, because everyone at the table, myself included, are super invested in these characters. And I really have to temper my enjoyment seeing these characters move through the world and interact with the world, in order to try and maintain some amount of objectiveness, that the world is not as elated with you guys as I might be. I mean, that's the world is a dangerous place, and so there's that consideration. But on the player side, I really would say to think heavily on the way in which you frame why your character is dying, or why your character is
because you
dead.
could easily blame someone else.
Because and I think that tends to be there tends to be a sense of,
And it might be just like, don't blame the DM, don't blame yourself. Accept that this was a possibility, and this is just the dice rolled with the dice roll.
right, and couched in that possibility is all sorts of opportunity to, in the same way it's incumbent on the DM to not go, all right guys, great session, let's roll them up and let's say,
All right, yep.
it's an incumbent on you, like you as a player, are the final moments of that character you standing up and storming out of the room,
Yeah.
or are they you taking the reins and doing something meaningful in that space?
Which is so hard to do in the moment.
It 100%. I know how difficult that can be, especially for long running characters.
Yep.
But again, there's immense opportunity there, and I think that when that initial reaction kind of washes over, and you have kind of recouped yourself for sessions moving forward and what have you, that's where you really start getting the reminders about who that character was and why they were important to the story. I think to some extent that you can kind of lose sight of the forest for the trees.
Yes.
When you're living day to day with that character, and so that would be kind of my big takeaway in thinking about player death. I would love to hear from everyone out there, because I know player death and TPKs are wildly different from system to system.
Yes.
And so
even table to table.
Oh, even table to table, absolutely. So I'd just be really curious to hear. Give us some of your war stories.
Yeah,
or I'd love to hear about what was the final act.
That would be crazy. Yeah, share how your character sadly went to the afterlife.
And I mean, any thoughts that you have? Like I said, I can't get enough of the comment section.
Yeah, that was fantastic.
I love hearing from everybody. I have a feeling that I'm going to be hearing from some of you OSR boys about your thoughts on player death, and more power to you. I like I said, I love hearing it. I know. We don't always see eye to eye on those things, but
no, hang on. This is the internet. If you don't perfectly agree with everything that someone thinks, and they're horrible people, and you hate them.
Yep.
That's how the internet works, man.
That's how it works. I'll say, thankfully.
No, I'm joking.
Whatever it is that they're doing, that we're doing, that whatever combination of variables is resulting in ultimately some really, really awesome insights.
It's just amazing what's happening in the comment section.
Yeah. So
even if we don't agree, hey, you play your game. We learn from each other, and that's the most beautiful thing.
I think it's time to take this one out.
I agree, man. What do you want
to
do?
I think it's time for your final. As
Cal?
I
can do this as Cal.
As the blow rains down, the armor, the shield, the gear that has been by your side, that you've maintained meticulously, as it fails you in this moment, and you can kind of feel the heavy cleave begin hemorrhaging, just the heat of life spilling out through that armor, painting the floor around you as you slump, no longer able to hold yourself upright.
Right.
They already know the world is theirs. If you can sneak it in there, all the better. But in those final moments, what is that experience for?
All right. I can't believe it's over. I tried. I let him down. I did. It's my fault. No, I can fight. I can't. Friends, I may go now. But no, the world is yours.